Part 10. So in these next few parts, I just want to break down some of the more alleged messianic passages that are talked about within messianic or Christian circles as to be messianic. And these, I guess I would call them the but chapters, or the but verses, because when you start talking about the potential of, Jesus not being the Messiah, or that he's not prophesied, you get the but what about this? But what about this? And obviously I can't go through them all, and I'm just going to go over my findings and my discoveries through some of the major buts, the major buts. So I know it's hard, and it was difficult for me to take an honest look at some of these passages. And again, I have to put myself in the courtroom, in the judge's seat, to be able to look at a passage for what it's saying in its context, and not have a biased perspective. If I was a judge ruling for a family member, I don't know that I could judge unbiasedly, because my love for that family member would be so strong that I would almost be willing to bend the truth or put truth aside in favor of that family member, even if they were guilty. And so that's why judges don't, they're not going to judge a trial for a family member or somebody they're already involved with. So yeah, it takes getting outside of yourself and being able to look at something from an unbiased perspective to see with clarity. And I think that's what trips us up so easily, is because we're coming to these texts with the Jesus glasses on, and that's all we see. Just like the lady in the story I told in the last part, she saw Jesus on every page in the Old Testament, and she even saw Jesus in somebody who is said to be a false prophet, and that's bothersome, that's scary. If that's all we do and take lines and verses out of context, then we're going to be looking at these falsely. And yeah, we can come to our own conclusions and make it say what we want it to. So anyways, I'm going to start out with the first one is going to be in Deuteronomy. All right. And I would encourage you guys, definitely go read these passages, like read the whole chapter, read everything around them. But for the sake of time, I'm just obviously reading like the literal verses that were from that list of 365, the but chapters. All right, so here we go. The first one comes from Deuteronomy 18, verses 15 through 19. And Jehovah said to me, what they have spoken is good. I shall rise up for them a prophet like you out of the midst of their brothers. And I shall put my words in his mouth, and he will speak to them all that I commanded him. Now, in this passage, Moses knows that he'll be dying soon, and Yehovah is going to put Joshua in his place as the leader to take them into the promised land. When this is being spoken, Moses is to tell the people that this is going to take place and that they need to listen to this person that's going to be taking over for Moses, because he's about to die and he's not going to be there anymore, and they need a leader. In other words, this prophet, the one that Yehovah is instituting, you better listen to him, because I'm putting him there. We can read on in the Torah and in the book of Joshua to see that indeed Joshua is the one whom Yehovah raised up from among them to lead them, and he did just that. The people of Israel were to listen to him as they listened and followed Moses during their time in the wilderness. In many circles, this is used as a reference to Jesus, that when he comes, we're to listen to him. And I can see how this could be taken that way. But there's a few problems with this perspective, though, because it is a little out of context to the passage. Now, first of all, Moses is telling those people right there in that time that a prophet like Moses will come out of their midst of them, and that they, right there, right then, need to listen to him as they did Moses. Now, why would they need to be forewarned about someone who they would never even meet nor be able to listen to 2,000 years down the line? And in 2,000 years, they're going to all be dead. So why do they, standing right there at that border of the promised land, need to be told to listen to someone they're never going to meet? The Torah, in its historical account, really was not written to be a prophetic book in nature. In context, this passage is a narrative about an event taking place in this moment. And Moses is speaking about Joshua, who will take his place, and the people there are to listen to him. And it doesn't help that most translators capitalize the word prophet in this English translation. And we know that in the Hebrew language, there are no capitals, let alone punctuation. So you can even see in the translator here, there's a bias there. And even if we are to say that this is about the coming Messiah, how does this link to Jesus? There's absolutely no connection there and no identifiers to tell us who this person would be if this is going to be taken as a messianic prophecy. All right, the next one on the list comes from Deuteronomy 23, and it says, "Let his body not remain overnight on the tree, for you shall certainly bury him the same day. For he who is hanged is accursed of Elohim, so that you do not defile the land which Yehovah your Elohim is giving you as an inheritance." When reading the instructions about punishments for a crime, so to speak, here we have another one. There are many instructions regarding how to handle such things, and in this case, the passage is speaking about not keeping a body on a tree past sundown. And there were countless people who hung on trees for punishment throughout history. As a BC era reader, I would read this in context to say that if someone's hanging on a tree, get their body down before sunset, and that's pretty straightforward. And this would have happened to hundreds, if not thousands of men in between this time when the instruction was given in the 1st century. So what? It doesn't make any body hanging on a tree special because there were more than probably could be counted. So I don't see this as a prophetic verse as a BC reader. On a side note, having sought out Hebrew Jewish scholars on the meaning, I discovered that the English rendering would make it sound as though the person is accursed, and that's not actually what it's saying. In reality, though, the truer meaning of the Hebrew language would render the verse to say that the man hanging on the tree makes a curse of God. This is so because man is made in his image, and no man is to be left out rotting on a stake. Each man is to be properly buried on his day of death. Regardless, in context, the passage itself is not a prophetic message, but an instruction about what to do regarding a punishment. And more punishments are listed in previous verses to this one, yet no one makes that a messianic prophecy, yet singles this one out. There's just no evidence that this was intended to be some kind of prophecy, nor does it give us an indication of what to be looking for when the Messiah comes. All right, the next one I have here is Hosea 11, verse 1. And it says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." Yehovah also calls Israel his son in other verses apart from this one. He tells Pharaoh that Israel is his firstborn son, so this is nothing new to be called a son of Yehovah. As a BC reader, understanding what is going on in Hosea's day, we would see that Yehovah is talking about how he brought out of Israel, or how he puts it, his son, out of Egypt. Sorry, let me start over again because I messed that up. As a BC reader, understand what is going on in Hosea's day, we would see that Yehovah is talking about how he brought Israel, his son, as he puts it, out of Egypt, and yet from there they went on, though, to serve the Baals and burn incense and carved images. I put this list on the verse. Sorry, I put this verse on the list. I'm so backwards today. I put this verse on the list because the account of Matthew lists this verse as a prophecy fulfilled by Jesus in Matthew 2, verse 15. Yet when you actually go back and read the book of Hosea, you find out that this has nothing to do with the future Messiah, but specifically about Israel. This is an account of what has happened. If this was about Jesus, then in context too, he would have had to serve the Baals and carve images. So why choose that one line, stop right there, cherry pick it, and make it messianic? You know what I mean? Like, many people have come out of Egypt, not just one person. It would seem that the claim Matthew makes that somehow Jesus fulfilled this passage is like making the claim that the Messiah would be a man with 2 arms and 2 legs. Like, literally anyone could fulfill that claim. So that doesn't really help us out any. Anyone could have come out of Egypt if you interpret this Hosea verse to mean it was specifically talking about Jesus. So when reading the book of Hosea as a BC reader, was the writer giving me identifiers of how to spot the Messiah? And if so, he did a pretty lousy job because, again, you might as well just tell me he was a man with 2 arms and 2 legs. This passage is not messianic, but a historical account of Israel being called out of Egypt. Let me start over. This passage is not messianic, but a historical account about Israel being called out of Egypt, who then went on to do what was evil in the eyes of Yehovah. Why Matthew uses this as some kind of fulfillment text, I don't know, and I can't even begin to explain that one, but it was honestly a pretty lousy one to use. Okay, now we have Jeremiah 31 through 34, which says, See, the days are coming, declares Yehovah, when I shall make a renewed covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I strengthened their hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Yehovah. For this covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declare Yehovah. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts. And I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall they teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know Yehovah, for they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares Yehovah. For I shall forgive their crookedness and remember their sin no more. Here we know Yehovah is describing what he calls a renewed, or some translators use the word new, but that's not what's important here. He's calling it a renewed or new covenant, but not with any Gentile nation or with anyone else, but his people, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not the Gentiles. The word renew is chosen by Hebrew scholars because this word kodesh refers to something that is refreshed, not so much something that's replaced or comes as a new thing as we would think of it in our 21st century English-speaking brains. Each month, a new moon does not mean that it's literally a brand new moon, but that it's a renewed moon. It's refreshed. But that's, again, not what's important here. He says that with this covenant, he will put his Torah on their hearts. And this is, first of all, problematic with some Christian doctrines, because that now says, because of the Christian doctrine says that because of Christ's work on the cross, and this being the new covenant, that the Torah is now not a part of our lives anymore. That the Torah is old and there's a new way. And if something's on your heart, then would it mean that it's in your mind to be doing as well? If you do a search on all the times throughout the Torah that Yehovah says to love him with all of our hearts, it is connected to obeying his commands. So the heart is connected to our actions. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. By Christian doctrine, though, Jesus took the Torah away, or at least parts of it. From a messianic perspective, however, the statement is false because the writings of the New Testament show that Jesus never said anything of the such, but that he came to uphold the Torah and not let any little part of it fall. But regardless of that, we are given an indication that in this time of the renewed covenant, that no more will anyone have to say, Know Yehovah, because everyone will know him. Does that sound like it's already happened? No, it hasn't. That's why there are thousands of dollars spent yearly for missions work. Obviously, not everyone knows Yehovah, and there is a need for him to be known. From either a Christian or Messianic perspective, this new covenant was not talking about anything Jesus might have done. And again, I ask myself, what indicators did the author give me here to recognize the Messiah or the end of the days? What is it? Well, number one, that the Torah will be on our hearts. And number two, that everyone living will know Yehovah. There will be no need to spread the word about him. And this is what that covenant will look like. So given in context, this passage is actually still speaking about something yet to come. We are not in a new or renewed covenant yet with Yehovah. And as a side note, part of that covenant is all of Israel that has been scattered will be joined together. And we see that in other clear and consistent messianic passages. I didn't make a note of that here in this little writing, but I just thought of that. Anyways, so the verse in its full context of the passage shows nothing that has anything to do with Jesus, actually. And just saying that you brought in a new covenant doesn't mean you actually did that. I know that New Testament authors say that what Christ did was the new covenant, and that's fine, they can say this. However, it definitely doesn't line up with the passage in Jeremiah. What Jesus did, according to tradition, was take away the Torah, and the word of Jesus spread, not Yehovah. So in actuality, Jesus did the opposite of what Jeremiah speaks. He did not fulfill this prophecy. The next one on the list comes from Proverbs 30, verse 4. It says, "Who has gone up to the heavens and come down? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? Who has bound up the waters in a garment? Who established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is his son's name, if you know it?" This verse reminds me a lot of the passage from Job when Yehovah is questioning Job and setting him straight, so to speak. In chapter 39 of Job, if you're unfamiliar, Yehovah is making a point to ask Job these questions he cannot answer in order to show him that perhaps Yehovah is much bigger than our minds can sometimes fathom. Ultimately, not everything is for us to know or think we have control over. So when reading the 30th proverb here, it would speak much of the same thing. As in the case of Job, Yehovah is asking him rhetorical questions. The questions here in the verse in Proverbs is much the same way. Questions are being asked but not expecting an answer. If this were me in the situation as a BC writer or reader, this is what I could get from this passage. So when he says, "Who has gone up and come down?" Well, no one we know of. Who has gathered the winds in his fists? Well, no man can do that. Who has bound the waters up in his garment? Nope, nobody. Who established the ends of the earth? Nope, none of us. What is his name? What is his son's name? Well, he doesn't have a name nor a son because there is no one who can do this stuff. I think it's the phrase, quote, "and his son's name," that, I don't know, just magically makes this passage somehow prophetic to people. It seems like people get all hyper jumpy at the tiniest little phrase or word that could indicate a little speck of Jesus here, much like the lady who was talking to the rabbi who saw Jesus on every page. If that part of the verse never made it to the text that says, "What is his son's name?" this literally would have never made it to the list of messianic prophecies. To ask who did something and what the man's son name is to identify more directly who the person was. In nature, this passage was not written to let the reader know more definitely who the future Messiah is supposed to be, but rather a strand of rhetorical questions to show a point that, alike Job, the man being asked questions in this passage is not a man of wisdom. The person being asked about rhetorically in the passage does not exist, and that's the point. These are rhetorical statements. Okay, well, even if this was messianic, what would it tell us? What, that Yehovah has a son? Well, of course he has a son. In fact, Israel is defined by Scripture as Yehovah's son. So in reality, this passage doesn't tell us much, even if it were considered messianic. There's no link to Jesus anywhere here. All right, the next one is Malachi 4, 5 through 6. It says, "See, I am sending you Elijah the prophet before the coming and great and awesome day of Yehovah, and he shall turn the hearts of the father to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with utter destruction." Now, I'm not sure exactly how this would look in that day, but it does say that Elijah the prophet will be sent before the great and awesome day of Yehovah. I note about this passage does not say the spirit of Elijah or someone in the likeness of Elijah will come before that day. No, it says that Elijah will be sent. Maybe a resurrected Elijah? I don't know. But what I do know is what the verse says, and that is that Elijah will be sent. We see also from this verse that there's harmony between family relations and peace, and this is what I gather from the passage. I included this one here because in Matthew 11:14, Jesus is seeming to allude that John the Baptist is Elijah, the prophet who would come before the Messiah. Yet stating in John 1:19, John the Baptist, when being asked if he was Elijah, says very, very clearly about himself that he is not. And on a side note, this is one of those contradictions within the New Testament, but that's a side note. So one person says that he's Elijah, even though John himself denies it. And if somehow he was, John apparently never got the memo that he was. You'd think he'd know something about it. But I mean, that's just what I think. Luke 1:17 says differently from the other New Testament references, saying that John is Elijah, but only in spirit and power. Could this be what Malachi is meaning? When we go back to the Malachi verse, I can't help but to see that this is not prophesied about Elijah coming to them in spirit and power. I mean, it would have been so super simple for Malachi to write something like, "See, I am sending you a sign, the man in the spirit of power, in power of Elijah, the prophet, before the coming and great and awesome day of Yehovah." No, it just simply says that Elijah will come. However that happens. Again, we have John himself, when asked, denying to be anything of the such. So is this a messianic passage? Absolutely. And it coincides with the messianic passage from the beginning of Malachi chapter 3. So what do we gather from this particular passage? Well, that when Elijah comes, then the Messiah will. Then after that, the terrible day of Yehovah. It would then appear that the hearts of the children will be for their fathers and vice versa. So it sounds like a time of peace, of family peace. But let's look at the other side of things. So let's say that Jesus was right and John the Baptist was Elijah, the one to come before him. If we plug this story from the New Testament back into Malachi, it actually doesn't work. Firstly, we know that the great and terrible day of Yehovah didn't happen and has not happened, so that was left unfulfilled. Secondly, Jesus said himself in Matthew 10:34 that he did not come to bring peace but a sword. He came to turn a man against a father and the daughter against her mother and so forth. So it would actually seem in this instance, Jesus did the opposite of what this passage in Malachi is referring to. Jesus said in his own words that he did not come to bring peace but bring division. Malachi says that the Messiah will turn the hearts of the children to their fathers and vice versa. So Jesus did nothing from what this passage is indicating, and in fact, did something the opposite of fulfillment. This is the end of this part.